Well, first off, welcome to the New England Sitecore user group tonight. We have Solr in action being presented to us by Tim Braga, who is a Sitecore MVP and the senior web developer of Colette. Give him a big round of applause.
All right, thanks for coming. So tonight we got a great talk. We're going to be talking about Colette's implementation, like a real implementation of Solr. So how many of you guys have dabbled with Solr? 2? 4? Man, you guys are really shy. All right, I know a couple people have dabbled with it in a production instance or a semi-production instance. So how many people have done that? I know 1. Come on, 2, 3. All right, cool. All right. So way back in June of last year, Colette started diving into their development of the Colette website. And it was a complete redesign, ground up. We implemented Sitecore. We were trying to decide, are we going to go with Lucene? We're going to go with some of the other providers, Coveo, or this new thing that they just put into the Sitecore box, Solr. So I'm going to kind of walk through Colette's implementation of it, what we were thinking early on, what we were anticipating, what we had to go back and make some adjustments for, maybe regarding performance. And then we'll go into a deep dive of the Colette implementation, where we'll start talking about custom indexes, custom crawlers, computed fields, and really how to make your own index. So it's really divided up into 2 parts. So the first part, it's probably about maybe 15-20% of the presentation is the PowerPoint, and the second part is the deep dive. So we'll go through the presentation pretty quick and get into the more technical, more fun stuff of the presentation. Okay, so what is Solr? Solr was founded in 2004. It's an open source search provider, and it was built by CNET as an in-house project. That was pretty cool. That's something I didn't know, and I researched last week and found. So what's some other cool things? So it's scalable to the billions of documents. It supports sharding and faceted search results, so being able to kind of break up or partition your index onto multiple servers, and faceting search results for grouping, which ultimately makes it a lot easier for the end user, the visitor on the website, to drill down and find what you're looking for. Who would have guessed? It's built on Lucene. Single server implementation. So what do I mean by this? All you guys that know about Lucene implemented 5 front ends. You all know that you have to be running 5 separate indexes that are really specific to that front end. So one of those indexes could be out of date. You search on one thing, the load balance, it puts someone else on another server. You might get different results. The nice thing with Solr, you can host it on its own box, and then all your front ends talk to that one server. I don't want to make you guys too dizzy here. All right, so who are some of the big players with Solr? I had to throw in Colette, just to definitely one of the largest players. No, I'm just kidding. Netflix, I thought that was really interesting. I use Netflix almost every day through Apple TV. It always brings back a lot of results, groups them. It knows what's recommended for me. And Yelp was another one I found, also whitehouse.gov, and there's a whole list of them. So back in the early phases of the Colette project, we're trying to decide why should we go with Solr over some of the others. I had experience with Lucene before. I had also had experience with Coveo. Coveo is a very, very good product. It's probably a little bit more than we need, and just the dollar-wise, we felt that Solr would give us what we needed. And we're already spending a good portion of money on the Sitecore license and the server implementation, and obviously paying our developers. So Lucene had some problems of its own. If any of you guys are used to Lucene in the pre-7 version, there's always problems with doing where clauses against certain types of fields, sorting against certain types of fields. And for me, I always just had a headache and a bad experience with it. So if there was something I could get away from Lucene, something new, something really exciting, I was really willing to try it. And that was Solr. And again, back to the single server implementation, Lucene requires an index on each server. So if you have 10 indexes in your site, you have to have 10. You have to have a copy for each server implementation. That's not the same for Coveo. Coveo can run on its own, just like Solr. So they're pretty much the same in that regards. Okay, so initial concept and evolution. When we were designing the search page for Colette, we knew we wanted to be powered by Solr at this point. And what we wanted was a faceted search result, and we didn't want the results that came back. We didn't want to do any lookups in Sitecore. We wanted everything pre-computed. We wanted it ready to go so that it was delivered to the client and to the browser as fast as possible. So Solr gave us that. We were able to create a custom index that had probably 20 to 25, maybe 30 computed fields, which gave us all kinds of flexibility. So for example, the title. So Beauty of Japan, Floral Wonders of South Africa, we have a computed field called title. And all it's responsible for doing is taking in that tour's title and storing it in the Solr index in that document. And the same thing goes for a lot of those other fields. You can see it has, was it 15 days, 23 meals. We actually have the minimum amount of days, the max amount of days, the minimum amount of meals, and the max amount of meals. And on the front end, we're doing something just to make sure, well, if the min and max didn't equal each other, then we'd say there was a range. But we're basically taking everything beforehand, putting it all into the index, and getting it ready for the presentation. So Solr was able to give us that flexibility very easily. So the next page is the evolution, right? So that was the initial concept. That was the initial build out. We actually built the search page probably around August. This we finished around the December timeframe. Site launched early January, late December. We realized there was performance issues with this page. If you think about a tour, right? So what does a tour consist of? It's very hierarchical. So a tour consists of a lot of packages. Under each package, you have a package date. Under each date, you have a price for each guest configuration, like a double or a triple. And so getting all that data in a timely manner and then doing checks against currencies and markets and going over to different parts of the tree to get excursions, contracts, upgrades, and other things, it took a long time. So we did some caching, and that helped. But ultimately, it wasn't a long-term solution. So we started a project in February where we take the actual tour data, not what we need for search, not what we need to search on, but the actual tour data, put it into a serializable POCO object, and then serialize that into the index. So we actually built another custom index with like 5 fields or so. 4 of them were meant for searching. So I could run a query against Solr and say, hey, I need this package date, or I need all the package dates for this tour, maybe some other criteria. And one of the fields was pre-computed POCO object that represented all the data on this tour. And that gave us a really fast way to access a lot of data. And so that's what helped speed this page up. It's actually not in production yet. It's still in beta, or whatever you want to call it. It's still in testing. So we're hoping to have that implemented in a couple weeks. But I'm going to bring you behind the scenes once we get out of the Prezi, and I could show you how we went about some of these things. All right. So let's get started with the fun stuff. So I'm going to show you how to work with the Solr web interface. So to get you right in the front end, if you worked with Lucene, you probably worked with Luke. Solr has a much nicer front end, I think, and you're able to do sorting and searching, and you can check out all your different indexes. We're going to take a look at the Solr config. It's rather large. I forget how many lines it is, but it can get very confusing if you don't know what you're doing. So I'm going to kind of break it down for you and kind of go piece by piece and explain the different sections. So we're going to take a look at some simple examples of indexes, which could be countries, states, different taxonomy lists that might get spread out across different sections of the site, but we just want a quick and easy way to access them. And then we'll take a look at some of the more complex indexes, such as the search index, which had that 20 or 30 computed fields, and the package date index, which had just the 5 fields, but had that nice serializable object. All right, a little prelude here. Let's see. All right, let's start. I got to keep you guys awake, and I love Sitecore. I'm sure half of you guys do too. My fiance thought I was nuts. I also did the same thing at the symposium, and that was fun. All right, so let's break out of the Prezi, and let's go into Visual Studio. All right. So if you're not familiar with Sitecore, Sitecore runs on these things called pipelines. It's very configurable. You can basically do anything you want. And a lot of things have their own config files, which is great. It keeps it separate and contained. You don't want a 5,000-line web config. You want to break these out into their own respective files. And that's the nice thing that they did for us with Solr and a lot of other modules that are a part of Sitecore. So what are the different parts of the Solr configuration file? Let's just, at a very high level, go through them. Right? So we get indexing strategies, which allow the indexes to update on certain conditions, whether it's timed, whether it goes off of events, or if you want to build a custom thing to get triggered by some other means, maybe a remote means. We have this thing called a default configuration. That's this guy here. So a default configuration is the default configuration for the Sitecore master, Sitecore web, and Sitecore core indexes that come out of the box with Sitecore. So when you get Sitecore, you load it up and you decide to go with Solr, it's very easy to switch it. And then and they give you these 3 indexes, one for each database, core, master, and web. They're very, very, very simple databases, or very simple indexes, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So what else do we got? We got all our indexes here. These are the 3 that come out of the box. You can see I get several. And then if we come on down, we have the settings. There's a couple of important settings that you want to know about. So Solr, by default, based off of this configuration file, is only going to return 500 results. So if you're looking for 1,000 results, then you want to increase this. But be careful, because the more that you increase, the more it's going to return, the longer it's going to take, because you're doing an HTTP request to get that information, and the response object is going to be a lot bigger depending upon how many results that you're bringing back. So they do limit it to keep the performance up.
Can we adjust your screen resolution to be bigger?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's hard to see.
Do you know how to do it?
Yeah.
Oh, just the zoom level, or?
I think that's what this is.
Okay, I can play around with it.
Is that better?
I can also get this out of the way. All right. Yeah, so just keep that setting in mind. It's really not a big deal, but just something to keep in the back of your head. The other thing, right, so the way Sitecore knows what provider to use is because it's being called out here. And by default, Sitecore comes using Lucene, and the Lucene config files are in place. So all you have to do is take those config files for Lucene and rename the extension, .old, .example, delete them, and then go over to the Solr config, rename it from config.example to config. Sitecore will pick up on that, and it will take a look at this setting and get picked up and know that it's Solr. And the last one that I want to talk about here is this is the address to where your Solr server is sitting. So currently this is sitting on my local machine. If it's sitting on another server, I'd put the address in there. And this implementation will know how to talk to it, know where to go to talk to it. All right. So that's the configuration file. We're going to get into this a little bit more, but why don't we take a look at the Solr front end. How many of you guys are familiar with the front end here? Who's kind of dabbled into it? So we got a few people here. Okay. So what does this give us here? It has a nice dashboard, kind of tells them some stuff about the system. But what you're really looking for are these core selectors. And it's really, the way I look at it is, these are all the indexes. And the way that Colette went about it is we created one index for every core, or one core for every index. So if we go take a look at one of these, let's take a look at Tor's Colette, right? And then we can drill down to this guy called query. Go down here, and we can run him. And we can see like a bunch of data there. So it's really cool. Nice and easy. We can see exactly what's in the index. We don't have to install Luke on the server. We can hit this from wherever it's really accessible. So if it's accessible internally in your network, you can get to it without being on the box. Maybe you have to be on the box. But it's nice. It gives us a really good interface. So how do we play around with it? So the main pieces that I've been using is this query window here, sort, and field. And also, you can output this in multiple different languages or multiple different formats. So if you want it in CSV, you can do it in CSV. Okay. So let's play around with it and have a little bit of fun, right? So let's say I want to see all the language versions that are of English, right? So let's say, grab the field, language, and we're going to say EN. Go down, let's sort. Okay, that gives us something here. So let's start getting some field names here. Let's say, I think title is one, so we can say, where's field? Title underscore S. So that underscore S is how Solr knows that it's a string. If it was a Boolean, it would be underscore B. And you might see some of the others as we go through. It's a string list here. Okay, let's grab some other fields. Ooh, that's the content list. Price I. Let's do that one. Okay, let's run this guy. All right. So that makes it a lot easier to read. So what Sitecore is going to do out of the box, it's going to index all its fields that it needs to know about, like language, item name, version number, path, just the simple things that we know about an item. What we wanted to do on top of this is get specific information, specific fields, and even computed fields going out to other items and making those relationships. So when looking at it in the console here, there can be a lot, so you want to minimize your result set. So here we want to look at the title, we want to look at the price field, and if we wanted to sort these, we can come over here and we can say title underscore s, and you have to prefix it with a ascending or descending piece there. So suffix. I think that'll work. I don't know if it's 3 characters. Yep, there we go. Yeah. Okay. So that's really the Solr front end. It's very valuable, especially when you're troubleshooting, going back and forth between Sitecore data. Make sure that you are, when you're doing your where clause in the index, if you do not ask for a language version, it will give you all the language versions that are applicable. So if that item has 5 language versions, that item will be in that index 5 times. So make sure you do your where clause on that language, similar to what we did over here. Okay. We can also do more stuff here. We say and then we can put in some field and then come with some value, or do an or, right? Okay. Let's hop back into Visual Studio and take a look at update strategies. So we implemented a couple update strategies of our own. So out of the box, they come with these interval asynchronous ones that get set up for the core master and web indexes. And long story short, basically what it does is it's event driven, and it takes a look at the publishing queue or the event history table. I dove down into it months ago, so I can't actually remember what it's doing perfectly, but it's going off of the event, Sitecore's events. If you scroll down, we can take a look at a couple of the ones that we built here. So we have a daily rebuild of an index and a 6-hour rebuild of an index. And you can see that they're both pointing to the same class, right? Full rebuild of index strategy. And all we're doing is we're just changing up the parameters. We have one going at 24 hours and one going at 6 hours. And basically what we're doing with this is we're assigning these to indexes. So if maybe something like countries, right? It's not going to change that much, right? We can rebuild that every 24 hours. It's not going to take that much time. We could even set it to 48 or whatever the business needs. If we have something that's a little bit more, I don't know, it needs to be much more up to date, right? We can simply go create another one of these. If 6 hours isn't enough, we can create another one of these. Just copy and paste it, change around the parameters, and just give it a different name. And that's how you reference it within the index. So if we scroll down, take a look at that master index. It has a section in here called strategies. And that points to content search, index update strategies, sync, which goes up to the update strategies up above. All right. So what makes up an index, right? This is an index out of the box. It has a class file, it has an ID, a name, a core, the strategy, the location, which has the crawler in there, the database, and the root. So very simple. And we know that this comes from that default configuration, which has a bunch of information into that because it's not specified. If you specify your own configuration, so for example, if you need computed fields or custom things within the index, you're going to have your own configuration section, which we'll get into very shortly. But you can see here, for this master index here, it's given a name, it's given a root. So basically this index is looking under anything under Sitecore. It's taking a look at the master database. And you can see it's specifying a core. This core relates directly back to Solr and how it's being stored. How many of you guys heard of switching cores on rebuild? Yeah, so that's a pretty hot topic with the new Sitecore 7 search providers. The ability to rebuild your search index without losing it while it's rebuilding. So for example, early on in the project when we were building our search index for the search page, it would take down the search page for 3 or 4 minutes while that thing was running. So we ran it overnight. We didn't do it that often because we wanted the search page to be up. We finally got around to implementing that switching on rebuild. I didn't know how easy it was. It's actually really, really easy. You can take a regular index, like this one here, and all you have to do is you change the class name. So the class is now going to point to switch on rebuild, Solr provider. I believe that's the class name. And it's going to take in another parameter. Oop. Of course, I'm always copying and pasting. I should just type it in. And this guy here is called rebuild core. And then you give it a core name. And what I've been doing is just doing underscore swap on the end. And basically what this does is when it builds the index, it builds it to this guy. So it's rebuilding the rebuild core, so that Sitecore swap. And then once it's done, it just swaps it. So there's really no downtime. And it saves it saves a lot of downtime. So it's a really nice feature. You can have these things running all the time without worrying that your index is not going to be available during that time. Has anyone implemented the switch on rebuild? Okay. I'll put this back just so tomorrow morning I'm not trying to figure out why my site's broken or whatnot. All right. So let's take a look at that default configuration, kind of see what's in this guy here. It's a lot easier to look at when you have a huge monitor and you can really zoom out of here. But you have these things called field maps. Let's see if I can fit all this on here. All right, well, we're just going to have to do some scrolling. So should be one in here for string, right? Here we go. So here's a really simple example. Why do we use field maps? So when you have a value, like title, for example, when we were taking a look at title on the front-end Solr interface there, remember how it was title underscore s? Well, that's defined right here. So you have a type name string, system.string over here, right? So you're going to define your field. When you define your field in your index, if you, say, for example, you're making a computed field, there's going to be one line in there. It says title. And the type name is going to be string. And that relates back to these lines up here. So we know it's of system.string. The field name format, how it's going to look in Solr, is this guy here. So it's going to basically take the computed field name, or the field name, put that guy here, and then suffix it with that underscore s. And that's how Solr knows that it's a string. Does that make sense? Okay. So those are the type matches. We can keep on going down. I'm going to skip over field names. Let's see what some of the stuff here that might be valuable. Okay, so they give you some examples here if you wanted to exclude certain things from the index. Now remember, this is the default configuration. So this is out of the box. This is being used for web, master, and core. And actually, that's all Sitecore. That's all Colette's using it for too. So all our indexes, like countries, search, package dates, all those have their own configuration section. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And maybe some of the stuff will make a little bit more sense. But within the configuration section, they give the ability to exclude certain templates, to include certain templates, to exclude certain fields, and to include certain fields. Right? So that gives you a lot of flexibility here without having to define like a long list of computed fields. All right. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to hop out of the default configuration. Whew. Where do we go here? Here we go. All right. So we talked about the cores, right? So and I said this relates back to Solr. So how does it relate back to Solr? And at this point, it doesn't really relate too much with Sitecore. It's really, this is Sitecore right here. Now, how does it relate to on the Solr server? So let's go take a look at Solr. So I'm running it under Tomcat. So I got a Tomcat server running here. You can also have a Jetty server. So within Tomcat, we have a little folder here called Solr. We can open it up, and this might look maybe a little bit familiar, but we have all our indexes, their core, so their cores, and their swap cores, right? We also have a Solr XML file. So really quick, we can go through this. It's very simple. I didn't have to make any modifications in this file other than to add my cores. And all a core is you give it a name, which is what you're going to reference back in the config file. So this tours._AAA, if we go back over here, that's what would be in this field here. So if we go take a look at, where's our tours AAA? Here we go. So that's where that guy relates directly over to here. The next attribute, we have an instance directory, and all this means is that if we go back out to the file system, point to that folder. And then within this, the only other modification that you have to do is you just have to give it a name. Sounds unbelievably simple. It actually is really simple. To get one of these up and running, all you have to do, all I did, was copy this Sitecore one, which they give you out of the box. I went in, I cleared out the index files, I cleared out the log files. If we go back up one folder, and then I just renamed that to the proper core name. So if this was the swap directory, it would be Sitecore_swap. Okay. All right. So let's keep on progressing through. We got plenty more fun stuff to talk about here. So we talked about some basic indexes, right? So we talked about the master and what that entails. So we get the actual class name for the index. We get strategies. And we got our location. So let's go take a look at it a little bit more advanced one. So let's pick countries because that's one that everyone can really understand. So how does this differ from the master, right? So this one is using the switch on rebuild. It has that additional rebuild core parameter. We're using a custom template-based configuration where we can pass in different parameters to a custom crawler that we have. So this gives us the ability to say, we want to only target items with this base template. And do we want to go deep? And if so, how deep do we want to go? How deep do we want to go down into that template hierarchical structure? Okay. We have the field maps. Oops, sorry about that. Scroll that guy over. There we go. So this looks familiar from what we talked about before. We get the string. It's not as built out as some of the others, like that default configuration, because we don't need all those fields. We only are looking to index. Well, with this one, all we have is 5 fields. So a lot of these we actually probably don't even need. We could probably cut them down to only 2. I'm not sure how Sitecore is going to react with that, with some of its own fields that it likes to index, such as date created, date modified, and some of these other ones. But yeah, here are the computed fields. So why might you need a computed field? Like validate against zip. That's a good example. We're actually running logic behind there to say, should we be validating on certain scenarios on the zip code? We have different business rules for some of our different sites. So this Sitecore instance has 5 sites in it. Some of the sites say, no, you shouldn't be validating against a zip code, or you should be validating against a state. So we have that in the index, and when we return this index to the presentation, it knows that already. We might have to go out to different systems. We might have to go take a look at a relational field, do some mapping, and return a true or false, whether we should be showing something or not showing something, or getting a price together across certain markets. So those are some good examples on why you might want to use a computed field. Okay, let's keep on scrolling down. And we're going to jump into really what is a computed field in just a little bit. Once we get out of the Solr config, we can start taking a look at some of these class files here. So I'm going to skip over this. This isn't something that we had to change. So I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't have that knowledge. Then if we come back down here, we got a couple sections that might look, again, familiar with us. We got the strategies. So this guy here is going off of that daily rebuild of index strategy. So that's how we're defining this index to update. And then we're also implementing a custom crawler. And we're targeting the web database, and we're giving it a route, just so it knows where to go get its countries. All right. Any basic questions so far? Diane?
The strategies, is the only thing you would put in a strategy how often the index rebuilds, or is there other configurations you could put into a strategy?
It's really, whatever the business need is for the update strategy. So if it's event-driven, you might want to set a parameter for what event it is, and once that event is triggered, that would make the update strategy a little bit more flexible. So with some of ours are custom. Ours were just based off of time. But you could base it around any type of business need that you really see fit. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's a little bit more of a complex index where we're able to show computed fields, and we're really trying to target what we're getting. So we're only looking for country items, and for that we're only getting these 5 fields back. All right. So let's take a look at these computed fields and what makes a computed field, right? So we give it a title. That's the title that we're going to see in the Solr front end, right? So when we were typing in title _s, so it gets the name from here, and it gets that _s from that return type. And all computed field it's really just a method that's going to return an object, whatever that object is. It could be a string. It could be a simple POCO object that's specific to your solution. It could be a more complex object. So let's go take a look at title and see what that gives us. Okay. So in our implementation, we have this thing called the iTor context, which gets all the Tor data for us. We basically pass in a Sitecore item, and it gets all our information back for the right currency, for the right market. And I'm able just to say, return Tor context.title. It's really simple. You can instantiate any of your other classes here. What it's going to give you is this thing called an iIndexable. So if we take a look at how we're using that, so we can go over here. We're doing some checks on the language. The reason I'm doing some checks on the language is I want to make this runs in the shell site, right? When it's rebuilding the index, the site is shell. So if we're trying to get URLs, if we're trying to get media URL and some of these other things going through the rendering process, it's not going to work as quite as you expected. So when you get a URL, it might be like Sitecore/content/ whatever. It's not going to be like / tilde media. So we have to make sure that the language is set appropriately, as well as the site and certain things. So you want to keep that in mind. The site and the language, just make sure those are set. So what we're doing is we're getting this iIndexable, and down here we can set that as a Sitecore indexable item and then set it back to an item. And as it's going over the item, oh, I can zoom in for you guys, sorry. Just speak up if I forget. I'm really forgetful. I always leave the laundry in the dryer, and it's in there for 3 days, and my fiance gets mad at me, so if I'm forgetting this, just speak up, and I'm pretty used to getting yelled at. It just happened the other day, too, for like the 115th time. Yeah, so that item is the item as it's crawling through the tree. That's the item that you get. And what the custom crawler comes in is it limits that item, right? So say, for example, we only want a certain amount of items. Well, we could do that with the template crawler, right? We can pass it in a template. It's only going to bring me back those items of that template. That's great, but what happens if I have to do some conditional logic? Like, for this language, for this site, is this Tor applicable? Does it have the right market and currency? How do we do that? And we'll get into that into the crawler in just a few seconds. But I want to show you just really how easy a computed field is. It's really nothing that should be shied away from or think of bad practice or anything. You basically get your item, and you guys can take it from there. You have your item, you can instantiate something else, you can make some relationships, you can turn it into a custom item and take a look at some of that properties and return whatever it is you might need. Does that do computed fields make sense to everyone? That's a big portion of what I'm talking about tonight. Dan?
Can I toss an example? I'll give you an example that came up recently in my practical account. We have taxonomy on items, but one of the components I was working on, we actually had to sort by the English value of that taxonomy. So in the index, you're just getting the GUID, and you can't really sort by that and have anything meaningful. But if you want to have videos come after events that come after abstracts, you need to go to that GUID, find out the English word. If you want to leverage Sitecore and not leverage Solr, not do it all in memory, you need to have your index sort by that English word. So I was completely stumped by that, and I haven't been to this talk, so Twitter helped me out. But basically, that's an example where when your index is going through, your item is going to have a GUID. You can build in logic to say, go to that, look up that other item, get the actual.
Yeah, you get a lot of flexibility with computed fields, and it's a really nice way to manage your index. And who loves dealing with class files, right? So you can have these simple class files for all your computed fields. All right, so I was talking about a crawler. Let's go check out our custom crawler. So if we go back to our configuration, we can see what this guy's doing. Scroll down here. All right, so we got a template-based crawler. And it's getting the template back from that configuration at the top. Remember that? Okay, so the one that we really want is the recursive. So what this guy is doing here is it gets a root item. And that's the root item that we set up in the index. And what index were we on? Let me just make sure. I want to talk about the correct index. Okay, so we're talking about countries. So that's going to be in the taxonomy at the countries folder, right? So now it's going to go through and verify that we, in fact, have all those items properly, because we don't want any folders or anything like that in our index. We just want it nice and clean, and that's what this custom crawler is going to help us with. So we got a couple conditions here, trying to decide if we're going to do a deep lookup, or we're just going to do a simple lookup, or we're going to use fast query or not. But long story short, without getting too much into the Sitecore API, we get our items to index, and it's already filtered because we're using a Velir extension method called isOfTemplate. And then we can iterate over those, just do some simple logging, and then we raise an event to get that indexed. And this isn't a custom event. This is basically a Sitecore event that I found when I reflected against their own custom crawler, and I mimicked my crawler against theirs, and then just put my custom logic in where I needed to. So let's take a look at a little bit more advanced crawler. Scroll to the top so I can get to the namespace. Let's take a look at the Tor crawler here. What do we got here? Just add a recursive. Great. So this is backed by the template-based crawler. It does a lot of the same checks. It's going to do a fast query right off the bat. It's not going to really do any checks against it. It gets all the items of that base template, and then it starts iterating over those. And what this is doing is it's using that iTor context that you saw back in that computed field that gave us that title object, that value. And all we're doing here is we want to make sure that that Tor is applicable for that website. So let me give you an example. Let's break out of here. I must have Firefox open, right? Let's hop onto... I want to show you right where this guy is indexing. So for those Tor crawlers, what it's doing is it's crawling through this directory, right? So these three are websites, 1, 2, 3. We have an index for each, which runs our search page, the one I was showing you earlier. So what we're saying is we want to target this Tors folder, and we want a Tor landing page. So we're going to drill down until we get a Tor landing page. So this guy is a Tor landing page. So we know that. And this guy, all he's responsible for doing is he just knows that Tor, which is in the Tor repository, which is a little bit down below, all down here. It's in our Tor content manager. Okay? So this way the websites can all reference in that shared content. So this guy just wants to know about the Tor. So what the crawler's trying to do for us is it's making sure that we're only crawling Tor landing pages, and that for the Tor landing page, that it actually has a Tor value assigned in that field, so that this is actually set to a Tor. And if it's not, it's going to abort and it won't index that item, which is great because that's what we want. It might be because the content author screwed up or whatnot, but we don't want to show something that's not configured correctly. Another thing that it's trying to do, so let's go back, is it's trying to see if this Tor context factory is going to return a null for that iTor context. If it returns a null, it could mean several things, right? It could mean that maybe for this market and currency that it's just not applicable. Whatever it might be. Long story short, we're doing a check here just to make sure that this Tor or this item is valid to be indexed. And that's the primary purpose of this Tor crawler. If it passes all those conditions, we have the same statement as we did before, and we're raising that same event. And then really Sitecore takes it from here, and Sitecore will pick up on those computed fields and start indexing that item into a document in Solr. All right. Any questions so far? All right. You guys can always ask questions at the end. There's going to be a question period there. All right. So let's hop on to the next piece. a lot of times with Sitecore, how many of you guys watch those Sitecore 7 Hangouts that the 7 team has been doing? I learned a ton from those. They're fantastic. I hope they continue doing them, not just with 7, but additional stuff other than search, and kind of keep on going. It's a great knowledge transfer. And if you guys aren't watching it, put on your things to do, because they're really fantastic. I don't know how many there are out there so far, maybe 10, maybe 15, and they're about an hour a piece, but each one I learned a ton from it. So props to those guys for going out and spending the time and doing that. It's very helpful for the community. So a lot of times what we see with the examples with Solr, and not just Solr but Lucene, and it's really the Sitecore 7 search provider, is you have these simple POCO objects that represent your Tor or your index, right? Where let's see if I have one open here. Yeah, so retrieve from Solr. So this is a class that we have, and its responsibility is to retrieve a document from Solr. So it's just doing a search against Solr, and it's using generics here, and it's trying to say, I want this type of object back, which is a package date result item. All right, fine. What is a package date result item, right? It's really simple. It just maps to your index. So this index, which is our package dates index, has 5 fields. And all you have to do is create a simple POCO object, a plain old C# object, and just put these properties on there and decorate them with this thing called an index field. And you map it back to Solr. So for example, that title, yes? Oh yeah, thanks for speaking up. So let's try 150. Yeah, that's pretty good for this class file. Okay, so you remember back to that early example with the title field? So what we would do here, if that field was in our index, we can simply add it in. Oop. Come down here, and we just name this title. Sitecore will handle the translation for you. You remember how it was title _s? We don't actually have to manage that at this level. Sitecore translates that for us, and it will append all that in the underlying search query to Solr, which is really something that I've never had to touch. You don't really have to touch, and that's how easy it is to add these things in here. And from an object-oriented approach, we can access that. And so I'm going to remove this here. But if we go back to that class file we were just looking at, we can see how we're using it. So here, we got a package date result item. All right, so we know the different attributes or properties in that. So we can say x.language equals sitecore.context.language.name. So now we want only that language version to come back. We don't really care about anything else, just what we're looking at right now, what the context language is. And then we're doing some checks against the arguments. We can see if it's a base package, or we can see if it has a package date. So we're going to continue appending onto our query. So we're adding another where statement on there. So where we can say if that item is a base package and the Tor ID equals the Tor ID of the argument that was passed. And it makes it a really nice approach where we don't have to open up the brackets and type in the field name, and then if we ever change the field name, then we have to go back and change all our code everywhere else. Really, this is really nicely designed where you can go back into here.
Except for your index field attribute.
My index field attribute. Where is that?
The attribute.
Yeah, because that's the name of the field, so if you change the field name, you got to change it there.
That's right.
Do you know, does that thing accept the GUIDs?
Does it accept a GUID where?
Yeah, or an index field. Does it take GUID as an argument?
Well,
Or an ID, anything?
this isn't the GUID from Sitecore, right?
It's a field name.
This is the one from Solr. trying to map the two together. All right, so right now we're really referencing Solr.
Are you sure about that? Because this, like, you see technology works exactly the same way. This is part of the search API.
So it's talking to the provider. And
yeah, this is
swappable between the scene and
Yeah, so that's a field name, right? That's a
this is the documents field name, but not in Sitecore.
It does translate to Solr. I was going to say for the Q&A, but there are some weird things you can run into where it doesn't do the mapping the way you think it will. I can say, but basically, in that configuration where we showed the fields that were defined, list was defined, but IEnumerable was not. And I always use IEnumerable, so it wasn't doing the mapping, and I had to stick an _s in there, and it turned out, and then I figured out it was because it wasn't using the one type. So you can get into weird stuff if the theory is that you should be able to swap Lucene and Solr and all your code should just work, but the practice falls short.
Okay. Yeah, good points. We can chit-chat about it later. Yeah, so it really gives us a nice, clean, easy way to target that index where we can use kind of an object-oriented approach. And then all we're doing is we're trying to get some results back, and then trying to get one specific one back out of that. I could have put this all into one statement, but for readability and debugging purposes during the testing phase of this branch, I got it broken out. So we're just getting everything back for a list, and then we're just filtering down just to make sure that this field here, context, is not null. Okay, but that leaves a good question, right? So this is how they've been showing it throughout all these examples, all those Sitecore 7 Hangouts, a lot of the examples that you see online in documentation. But when you get into the real world things, like, let's see if I have the search page up, right? How do you parse something like this? Content equals reflect, right? So someone typed reflect into the search, right? And then you start building these out, and you get a long list of query string parameters. How do you go about that? So way back last summer, that was a question of mine. I had no clue how to do it. So I shot an email off to Tim Ward, and he came back with it's like 3 hours later, I couldn't believe it. He came back with a long email, and he's like, here's 3 examples. Like, here's three ways to approach it. 1, 2, and 3. Go with the second one, but don't do the first and third. And it's pretty funny because he gave a lot of context behind the others, and I ended up taking his advice and used this thing called the predicate builder. And I can show you how we did that. So basically what we're doing, let's head over to the, see if I have it open. Well, Tor search context. Let's increase this. All right, I'm going to zoom up a little bit. Don't mind my scrolling here. Okay, so what we're doing here, we get an object that gets passed into this class, and has this thing called parameters. It's really just key value pairs, right? We got the name of the parameter, which could be, if we go back over here, could be content, and the value could be reflect. We also have multiple values in there. And so we want to kind of go over those, and that's what this guy's doing currently. He's going over all the parameters, just doing some simple checks, and then we'll go take a look at this get default filter. Doing some more checks here. And then for each of the parameter values, right, so each one of them passed, we're doing this thing with the predicate where we can say, or, and then we open this guy up here, and we can use its indexer. And we say object indexer key. We have the field name, which from our example back looking up at the website in the URL was content, and the parameter value was reflect. So we're going to iterate over all these, and it's going to dynamically build out our search query for Solr. And that's how we were able to take a query string, iterate over it, and then query Solr for that. And it did the trick, works like a charm. We have a couple separate conditions for dates and a couple different things, but this default method here really gets the job done if you're trying to do something very simple. Okay. So another thing that we were confronted with is, if we go back to the search page, so we search for reflect. You notice reflections of Italy comes back at the top. All right, so when we first launched the site, it didn't do that. We searched for reflections. Yeah, it might have showed on this page. You can see there's 19 results. We're only showing 10 per page, so there's 2 pages here. So reflect could be on the second page, whereas we really want that to be at the very top because it's more relevant in regards to what they searched. So we had to go figure out how to do that. So let's take a look at how we did that. It's called boosting. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it in regards to Lucene. So we have a content filter search. And basically what we're saying here, you see this content here, this gets run on the search. So whenever you do a search, this method runs. And it checks to see if that parameter is part of the parameters in the search object. And if it is, all right, well, let's continue down and we're going to search on that. So where does the boosting come into play? Right here. So we have that. Okay, so we're iterating over. So we're breaking it up a little bit. So forgive me, I haven't looked at this in a couple weeks, but what we're doing here is we're making sure that there's no stop words in there. Someone's not searching for the or and. We can take those things out. We can take out different things, and we want to make sure that we're not searching against any punctuation. And then we're splitting that. So if they typed in 2 words into the search parameters, we're splitting that up and we're searching against that. And then we're using our predicate and we're saying, hey, does this field, now, does that field, title words, contain this value here, which would be reflect, right? If it does, let's give it a boost. Or does it just simply contain this? All right? So by giving it that boost, that's what allows it to be up at the top. And that's as easy as it was. Once I figured out how to do it, a little bit of help from Sitecore support, I was able to get that in there in 5 minutes. And it was a big issue that we had at Colette, and was able to get it resolved pretty quickly, and that was a big success. So relevancy search definitely helps on the website. So, all right. So we taken a look at some simple indexes. I talked to you about a couple of the more complex indexes, such as package dates, the Tor search ones. Let's go back. Let's quickly take a look at those before we can wrap this guy up. Yeah, all right, so let's take a look at this guy here. So we're going to skip over some of this stuff. Again, we have our core, our rebuild core, our base template that we're really looking for. That's the landing page that we talked about earlier. Then we come down, and here's all our computed fields. This is the index here that runs this page. It has all this data in it, all the prices, and different things behind the scenes. So we know the activity level, we know content, title words, continent names, country names, and all these link over to their proper computed field class objects. And this not only runs the result set, this also runs the facets over here on the left. So what do we got here? We got some Tor styles. We got some activity levels, some Tor links. So all this gets set up in here. We got one called length in here. Number of days, max, day length, price range. So it makes it really easy for us to go and figure this all out and just store it right into Solr. And Solr does a great job of just returning the objects back to us, the result set and the facets with all the proper counts. So this is a little bit more of a complex example than the countries. But all in all, they're very much the same. The only thing that this guy's doing differently is it's got maybe 20, 25 more computed fields for what we need. And it has that crawler down the bottom, which is going to give us, or it's going to verify for us or ensure for us that, in fact, what we're crawling over is proper. It's in the proper form, it's built out properly, and it's applicable for this site. All right. The last index I want to show you is that package date index. That's this guy here. I'm going to scroll down. You see it only has 5 computed fields into it. And what this guy is running is our Tor detail page. So that gives us all this information about this. Remember early on when I was talking about performance and getting all this information? And even when we come down, getting these recommended Tors, all this stuff takes time. Go across the tree, go down the tree, jump from different sections, do calls out to external systems, try to figure out what Tors are recommended based off of this Tor's criteria. We've got to do database calls there. So the page loaded, it just wasn't performing as well as we wanted to, and I knew we could make it better. So why not go to our good old friend Solr and see if we can do something about it. So a couple weeks ago I started down the path of creating this custom index where I have 4 fields, is base package, package date, package ID, and Tor ID. 4 fields to query off of. And then I have this context field which allows, which basically takes all the Tor data, puts it into a really simple C# object, serializable C# object. And in this class, in this context computed field, it serializes that for the index. So we can take a look at that. So let's hop to the top without knowing too much. So this might look familiar. We get that compute field value. Yes, thank you. Okay, so that compute field value that we're overriding, and it's what Sitecore gives us. We've got to override that so we can get our object into that field. Again, we get that Sitecore indexable item. We're coming down, we're doing some stuff with the language, doing some stuff with the site, making sure we're getting the proper values back from the Tor context. We're getting the Tor context, which knows how to go and get all that data from Sitecore and from the other repositories, some of our other third-party systems. And now we want to fill up this object called a package date object. So we call this method here get package context. We pass in the Tor context. And just like magic, we get this thing called a package date context back. There's actually a lot that goes into building up this package date context, but we don't have to get into it. And then from there, all we're doing is we're serializing the object. We're setting some things back to their original values. We're serializing that, and we're returning it back to Solr. So when we make the call out, it's actually really quick. And if we take a look at what this looks like in Solr, so we go back to Solr, let's switch this guy over to package dates. I have to scroll down here. Whoop. All right, and get to, query. Let's just make sure we get, well, we can just fire one off. All right, it's kind of big. There's a lot of text in there. But you can see here's the context field. So let's target it, right? Let's have a little bit of fun here before we end, right? So let's say it's a lot of stuff in there. So let's say we want to see Tor ID, right? So we're going to say Tor ID S. Let's say package ID S underscore S. And let's just say context S. Execute that. So we get these fields back here. So if we read over, right, so we get the title, we get the subtitle, and it is what it is. It's just a serialized version of that object. And it allows me very easily to get all that Tor information, which was very cumbersome to get. Now we're able to get it very quickly. I actually built out a little pipeline to take care of, let's see if I can find it in here, to take care of the searching in that, which gives us a little bit of a flexibility. So we got this thing called a package date context pipeline. It's a custom pipeline. We have 4 processors in there, and it's really simple. We're trying to retrieve it from the cache. We're trying to retrieve it from Solr. We're trying to build the context, and we're trying to add it to the cache. So we looked at retrieve from Solr. That's the class we were looking at before, where it was doing the search onto Solr. That gets run into this pipeline. So when you hit that Tor detail page, that page knows to run this pipeline to retrieve it from the cache, retrieve from Solr, build context, or add it to the cache. And the reason why we're doing some of these things, when you make a request out to Solr, it's not like Lucene. Lucene's file-based. It's right on the system. You don't have to make an HTTP request. With Solr, you are making an HTTP request over to Solr, so there is a small cost into that. So what we're doing is we're just caching that deserialized object, and we're adding it to the cache here. So if it's not in the cache, if it's in the cache, we're going to get it from the cache and we're going to abort the pipeline. So it's not going to run the rest of it. If it's not in the cache, it's going to try to retrieve it from Solr. Once it retrieves it from Solr, it's going to build the context, which we can take a look at this. It's really simple. So here we make sure we have a document, right? So this is our the document that we were querying against before. And we're making sure that the context field is all right. And then we're just trying to deserialize that guy. And if we get a context out of that, that's great. We're going to set it to the arguments. It's going to continue on down that pipeline. The next thing in that pipeline is just adding it to the cache. And if you take a look at the package date factory, is this it? Nope, this isn't it. One last thing here. Under tours, here we go. Package date context. Knew it didn't look familiar. So we got a couple methods we can call. Eventually it comes down to here, really. Yep. So eventually it comes down to here. And this is the private method that really is the guts of the factory. It calls that pipeline for us. And all we're returning is that context object. So args.context, which is that package date context. And the presentation of the page knows what to do with it. So that's an example of one of the complex indexes that we had to implement to increase performance. And it was a little bit outside the box, because if you think about what Sitecore gives you, they give you 3 indexes, master, core, and web. And it's really one item, one Sitecore item per document, whether that's Lucene or Solr. What we're saying with our custom indexes, specifically the Tor search indexes and the package dates indexes, is it's really multiple Sitecore items to one document in the index. So we might be going through hundreds and thousands or hundreds of thousands of items in Sitecore, and it's only going to translate to 100 or 200 different documents in the index. Like for this, when we go over all our dates, there's 4,100 package dates. For our tours, I think there's like 160 tours, but we're probably touching, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of items. So from a strategy point of view, we had to see if we could do it in the beginning and kind of play with some fire and do some test scenarios and see if we can implement it. But looking back in hindsight, we're really happy with Solr. There's not too much I would have changed other than implementing this package date index earlier. But Solr was a great fit for Colette, and we're very happy with it so far. So that's it for my presentation. I'd love to open it up for some question and answers.
How many records in the package date context index?
4,100 documents. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Currently on this implementation, I limited it down because I'm still doing testing, so I'm only indexing one Tor. This does take 5 hours to index. It goes through. I have to do some performance evaluation on the crawling of the index, but it does take, to do all 4,100, it was 5 hours.
How many Sitecore items in a particular package?
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
Yeah. So the way Colette has it is that each package date, which is like the lowest common denominator, right? It's anything on that can really be specific. So like the title can change for that package date or different things. So when it comes down to it, everything is specific around the date. So when we're looking at that Tor detail page, we scroll up. We get this date selector here. And we can select different dates. And what that does is it does an AJAX call and loads up the page again. And some of the Tor data might be different. It actually might be all the same. It's really up to the content authors if they want to change the data. So yeah, it's got to go compute a lot of different things. It's got to instantiate that Tor context, get all that data, go do some SQL calls. And one of the things that I'm looking at is trying to decrease the amount of time it takes to index that package dates. Because we get business needs like this, only 2 seats remaining. That actually comes from a reservation system. But to get that, we have to use the booking API, which to make that call is an intensive call, which slows down the page loading. So how accurate does that have to be? Is it all right to be an hour off? Is it all right to be 5 minutes off? It's really a business need, and we got to see, from the business how flexible they are. But there's a lot of things that I can speed up to make that 5 hours more 3 hours or 2 hours. Corey?
So it sounds like you started using Solr a couple of months after it was released. There have been a lot of updates to Sitecore in that time. So how has that, have you been upgrading Sitecore itself, and how has that upgrade path been, if so?
Yeah, so we are on Sitecore 7. It's on 7.0, so we're not on the latest. We're a few versions behind. We would like to get up to 7.1. So I can't speak to upgrading to the latest and greatest version of Sitecore. But I do know there are a lot of search fixes out there for 7.1. Diane?
Your Foco object was subclassing class, which is curious.
Yeah. Is that the one we were querying against?
Yeah.
Let's hop back into there. This guy here? Yeah. Yeah, it is. So originally I was like, I don't need all of Sitecore's fields in there, like created and modified. It really has nothing to do with my index. It's just a Tor index, and I don't need that type of stuff. So I didn't want to inherit from search result item. So this is one of the, I'm glad you brought it up because I had some pain points with this. I finally had to go and say, all right, I have to inherit from search result item because I was just redoing the wheel at that point. And it was throwing a lot of exceptions, and I was getting some problems, and I was just biting off more than I could chew, and the ROI on it just wasn't worth it. So if you have a POCO object, long story short, you want to inherit from search result item. Dan?
Question about you touched on the scene at the beginning of your talk, and you said that you had pain points in the past with dates and searching and sorting. Yes. So my understanding from Sitecore, sort of from those hangouts and so forth, is that that's been fixed.
It has.
Sitecore Settings.
It has.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Just to be clear, I mentioned early on, I had problems. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was with sorting. It was with where clauses, certain field types, integers or whatnot, prices, and it couldn't handle it properly. It does now. So if you're on Sitecore 7, Sitecore has upgraded the version of Lucene that they're using to the much later version, and those have all been fixed. For a long time, Sitecore didn't upgrade their Lucene DLL, and so we always had those problems.
That upgrade has faceting, but it's like a limited version of faceting.
For Solr?
For Lucene.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure with Lucene. I haven't used it on Sitecore 7.
So I'll speak to that. So my understanding is that most of your coding and all of this is going through the provider. And you have to really work to get around the provider, and the provider abstracts out the difference between Lucene and Solr. So there are places where you can run into little glitches with that, but pretty much it should be transparent which you're going.
So do you know of any limitations with faceting in Lucene?
Not with faceting. I know that what I've heard with Solr, the really big difference is, first of all, the scale can handle it.
Yes.
In fact, it's a single endpoint that's shared across your front-end servers.
Yep.
And then the multilingual is supposed to be levels and levels. And you can, even if you get an out-of-the-box Solr, I don't even think if you work on, you don't even have to load Sitecore. You can start doing stemming in French and German, and it just can handle just the vast amount of language of that. I just think that's, so if you have to do like really intelligent language handling in a multilingual site, that would really push you as well.
Cool. Yeah, with the multilingual, Colette is using multiple languages. Granted, they're all English, right? But we have 5 sites, really 3 structures. The Colette has US, UK, and Canada. Most of the stuff is the same. We are doing some language fallback and some other things. So Solr, I mean, you saw the where clause there where I'm querying based off of the language. That's really all I'm doing, and it takes care of it from there. One interesting fact with, that's how I know it's working off the correct language version stuff. It's the UK that calls, it's either the continent Australia or the country Australia. It's like Australasia. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. But I was like, you want me to rename Australia what? In what language? I've never heard of this, but all right, I guess that's what you guys call it, sure. So so we changed the name for that language version in Sitecore and re-indexed the search index, and sure enough, if you're on the site, let's go take a look at, let's hop over to, I think it's UK, maybe it might actually be our Thomas Cook site. Australia, yeah, so it must be thomascooktours.com. Let's bear with me just a moment. We'll see if we got it. You can actually see Solr working here. Yeah, here's Australasia. And you saw her in the other language, Even if it was for the UK, I guess Thomas Cook had a business reason to have it as Australasia. And they're the same items, it's just different language versions. And we are using language fallback, which works very nicely in a lot of these, the way we've structured our site. Corey?
So can you just talk about the setup of Coveo? If there was a learning curve involved there, and Solr. If there was a learning curve there, and what was that like?
Yeah. Well, there's a great blog out there. I'm not sure who wrote it. Dan Solove. If you search Sitecore Solr, I think it's the first result set to come up, first hit. So props to him for that. So getting Solr up and running, it really wasn't too difficult. I know early on, right when it first came out, I did have some problems with it. I had no clue what this thing called Solr was. I had no clue how to really implement it. I think there's a lot of documentation out there now, especially Dan's that kind of walks you through and how to do it. You can run it on multiple platforms. I was talking with Dan earlier. He's running a version on Jetty. We're running ours on Tomcat. We both didn't see any problems running it on either. So we both think it's pretty stable. I know to install Tomcat on this machine and on the server was very easy. To install Solr was really easy. If I need to replicate this over onto another machine, this is a brand new machine for me. It's actually my first day using it entirely. I just got it last week, so. But setting up Solr on this was very quick. Installed Tomcat, brought down the Solr files, and then to get all my indexes, I just copied them from the production server and brought it down. And then I showed you the configuration if you wanted to create your own custom index, how to do that with the that XML file where you're adding the cores. And Dan?
Curious about your decision to run everything to have all of have the three main indexes I think you mentioned are all in separate cores.
Yeah.
You saved yourself a lot of pain doing that.
Yeah. So Dan and I were talking earlier. Just early on, we just made the decision really just to keep them separate, right? So Sitecore, if you look at what they have their three out-of-the-box indexes, core, master, and web. And they're all pointing to the same core. All right, I noticed that in the beginning. I didn't really think too much about it. I was like, all right, those are the Sitecore indexes, but for our Tor search index, we're going to create another core. And then for maybe Thomas Cook Tors, we're going to create another core for that. But when I was talking with Dan earlier, so we didn't run into this problem on the Colette side, but Dan ran into it, where he was having multiple indexes going to the same core, and the same item was trying to be added twice, but Sitecore has a unique identifier on there, and it was throwing you an exception. Maybe you can speak to it a little more.
Let's skip one. So
it would skip one.
Yeah, Solr requires a unique ID schedule, and what Sitecore uses for that is that Sitecore URL that has the database name, the ID, the version of the language.
Oh, sure.
So they're sort of cutting a corner by putting them all in the same core, because you have master, web, and core. The home item is going to have a different unique ID because it's the master home, web home, and in fact they're all going to the same Solr core collection. Doesn't cause an issue. But then when I created my own custom index, and I was using client name dot development and putting everything into there, suddenly it was weird. It's going into this time it's going into my custom index. This time it's going into the main one. Yeah. And it was really obvious in hindsight.
Yeah.
And Sitecore support had to point me in the right direction. They're like, oh, okay.
Right. Yeah.
So basically, the takeaway is certainly if you're doing any custom development, you're going to have the separate collection for those.
So core is sort of so I've worked with other search engines, not Solr. So core is kind of a term that you don't see. So is that equivalent to a collection in most search engines, or?
They use the names interchangeably. They actually apologize for it in the documentation to say back in the old days it was viewed as like their kernel. But then at some point they realized they wanted to have multiple ones, and they kept the name stock. Okay. But they used the word, I think on some of the screenshots you showed it had collection, they use those words interchangeably.
So if you're used to like Google Search Appliance or Coveo or something like that, the words collection and core are probably...
Same thing.
Yeah. and our implementation for Colette, they're the same thing. And one index relates to one core/collection.
Yeah.
So.
And those are, so it's changed a bit in the last couple of releases of Solr. So now, if you have if you have a folder in the right spot and it's got something called item doc, whatever that is, properties, that file can even be empty. It's through the self-discover stuff.
Okay.
So, I mean, that comes up, you have to set up a new one. It's like a
All right, any other questions? Great, well, thanks for coming. I'm going to have my info on here. If you guys need any help or have any questions you want to, you think of tomorrow, whatever, or somewhere down the line, feel free to contact me. My email address up there, my Twitter handle is up there, and I'm happy to help. And thank you for all coming out and listening to me speak.